the problems of the Zephyrus DA sign grow. So let's look at this discussion on law that we get very interestingly in the debate on the Venezuela thing between, I'm going to frame it this way, between Article 1 and Article 2, because that's really what it was. It was Rubio, who had, interestingly, had in most of his career represented Article 1, or the deliberative body, but just sort of like the body that sort of wants to say, this is the type of record we should have on the record player. So this is the type of record that should be engaged on all normal cases, like on any normal day. Whereas Article 2 is always saying, Article 2 is Clotho, Article 2 is always saying, right now, there's stuff happening, and we're going to use our epideictic rhetoric, as Aristotle called it, our rhetoric of yes-saying and no-saying straight out, in favor of what we think we want to do right now. And so then you see this argument is between Rand Paul representing Article 1 and Rubio, who is now representing Article 2, very interestingly. It plays out totally on this level of two of the fates arguing amidst one another in the separation of powers schemes. But what was the main argument about? So see, I'm using this as a stepping block to show how Hermes thinks rather than how any of these three branches think. So we have a bunch of arguments that I'm trying to get to the point of what they touch on and what they keep sort of escaping into, which is the question of interests, of national interests, and what national interests are, or what the thing that's best for the United States is. But what they actually talk about for most of the time is this argument about should we be allowed to change terms and use euphemisms like kinetic action rather than war in order to escape the problem that Congress Article 1 is meant to, he keeps repeating this strange formula, declare or initiate war. The word initiate appears nowhere in the Constitution, but he has this formula, declare or initiate, which Rand Paul keeps saying, because he's trying to argue, look, we're the Congress, the Constitution says we decide when to declare or initiate kinetic action. Oh wait, but it doesn't say that. It says declare, initiate war. Actually, it doesn't say initiate. I don't know why he uses that strange. I assume it's a conjunction. It could mean two different things, like declare is saying and initiate is actually doing it or something. But I think he means it as like some kind of close or is what the meaning of or is there probably would determine if we had this in a transcript and we didn't know anything about this time period, it would be really hard to understand. But I think even looking at it, you could easily get it wrong. But I think if you know what's going on, then you think probably what he's doing by saying declare or initiate is just like a plenum of, it's just like two synonyms that are meant to cast light on one another, something like that, some kind of coordinated conjunction. declare or initiate is the same thing, but somehow initiate means to begin or whatever. Whereas declare doesn't, you don't necessarily think that, but that's what it means anyway. It's implicit in it. I think he's saying something like that, but you see how absurd these hermeneutic problems are, getting the interpretation of something right. But that's really a factual question in a way. It's just like, what did he actually intend by, what did he mean by it? It's a historian's question in some sense. I thought more interesting of these several questions that they raised besides from the main core thing of the question of the interest, we're always going to do what's best for the United States of America. We're always going to protect our system, Rubio, and then Rand Paul answers and says, yes, of course, our national interests are always preeminent. But one interesting thing I thought, and this we should remember, it's sort of like, here what I'm saying is when we're, well, no, let me save that for the transition of when I try to explicate what this question, this open question, what national interests mean. But the other argument made was in connection to the International Criminal Court. It was saying, when you guys in the executive fool around and just say this or that, say kinetic action instead of say war, and you don't pay attention to these and these considerations, you're doing the national interest a disservice or something like that, appeal to the national interest. But he makes this remark about the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and also mentioning the Netanyahu issue. And then he says, because we're dealing in a realist situation, then it becomes, then all the more you're, it's as though this realist war is breaking out between the branches, right? Because, and then he mentions also, I know you guys, John U types have this thing called the Article 2 supremacy or whatever, unitary executive and all this stuff. So and then one can say there's also Article 3 has a certain form of getting its own back and not, for instance, and not coming out too quickly with the case of, like now they're making us dangle over the tariff thing because this is the all-important thing. They don't want to too quickly sort of drop a bomb on the country in the midst of the current chaos, right? And also, but it's also because it's this fierce force for, like, what if the Supreme Court just slips away? Article 3 just totally loses the grip. It ceases to be a consideration. It becomes just, we've discussed this a bunch of things before. But now, their discussion, it seemed to me, was at the level of this bickering between the Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. But they referenced, nonetheless, law itself. Because they referenced, well, I suppose so far as the theory of sovereignty and national sovereignty is close to the issue of law as such, somehow. Very, almost like close to the essence of law in a certain sense. It somehow tells us what law is about. It's about sovereignty, which initially might not cast that much light on the matter, and then would say, that's just a tautology. But somehow these near synonyms cast a little bit of light, but then you want more, so you cry circular reasoning. But sometimes that's all you only get a little bit of light on the matter, and you can't give a long exposition on it. And if you did, it would still be misleading. So I wanted to read. So I mean, David Hume has said people have interests, but what they are is a matter of opinion. So we have a problem, right? So this. Let me retouch one more thing. The ICC case issue. Rand Paul said, even though he didn't mention the whole reasoning of it, the reasoning is like Article 6 says, he sort of alluded to it. It's like Article 6 says the supreme law of the land is our treaty obligations, which had meant in the past things like the Treaty of Paris or something like we make a treaty, the federal government makes a treaty saying all Americans will repay debts to the British, but then certain states say, no, we're not really into that or something. And so this is like the notion of the treaty obligations are the law of the land. But then this funny case comes in as if we have a treaty obligation with the United Nations as one of the founding members, no less, doesn't it mean that we have a treaty obligation to listen to the Hague Court and take the Hague Court seriously? So this is a case where you have like the law, or put another way, you have a philosopher in the pejorative sense, the appreciatory sense, where you say, oh, even the morons have a advantage over such a being because they don't really believe in their philosophy. So like, in other words, the Americans say they're party to the United Nations Charter. They say the Hague Court is the supreme law of the land by inference, but they don't believe it, and they say it's not in our national interest to understand it that way. So what does national interest then come to mean here? The national interest is not to be in favor of universal law, is not to be in favor of true and rational universal law on the theory that it will probably sometimes come out against us, as it did against Netanyahu. And Netanyahu certainly doesn't want to be treated to that International Criminal Court otherwise, because otherwise his own bodyguards, his own 8200 would just arrest him, because they'd say, there's justice up there shining on the hill in the Hague Court. Arrest this officer of the global system, of the United Nations, of the how did they put that? The Federation of the Star. So we were just doing the thing on Star Trek propaganda. Arrest this high officer of the Federation, because the Federation would have total control of the planet. It would be just like all the states are more or less under control of the United States, of the federal authority in the United States, but they rebel, as Minnesota is rebelling now against the federal authority. But now you're getting this intensified rebelling in the Congress. I mean, in the realm of Article 1 is against Article 2 and so on, in the separation of powers realm, as understood as a sort of liberal contest of enemyship in the Schmittian sense. Because once you have sort of this move into total war, then this is closer to the essence of the liberal thing, where I think this is also like what. So let me read Schmitt's. We could sort of see if we're as liberals as it were in the Nazi situation, because and according to how everybody's saying, we have to do what's in the national interest. So Schmitt's statement from I'll try to put it in the notes, from the Nazi Handbook on Law and Legislation says, everything that benefits the people is right, everything that harms them is wrong. Alles was dem Volke nützt, Recht, alles ihm schadet ist Unrecht. So, yeah, if the national interest in contradistinction to some statement about human interest as such. And then, in the case of Hobbes, which is a very strange case, but it seems to be in power in a way, is when, and I think actually Rand Paul directly identified national interest with right to defense, which is sort of like self-defense, or something like that, which basically it's like Hobbesian key foundational right is the right to self-preservation, you can call it. Whereas in the way Strauss deals with it, which just seems the most straightforward, is to say we went from life self-preservation to comfortable self-preservation, the Lockean formula. And that's sort of the basis of the liberal core principle. And then, yes, it's true, if you apply it, so one, you'd have to say, yeah, you get one of these Army War College handbooks or whatever. Well, there's like a lot of different handbooks. So you get one of these things they used to have, which is called like a statement of how to derive the national interests. And then they tell you things like the founding statement, right? The founding statement. So the founding statement was written in the time of the pantheismists, right? It was written in the time when deism. So we have this formula in the Declaration of Independence of nature's God, which is supposed to signal some kind of deism, so-called. But what does that mean? What is nature's God? It means that the personhood understood as intelligence and as personal will is read out of the world picture. It's read out of the Weltbild. And that's absolutely, that's what happens. So, so then when you remove the person, then you get deism, then you get Jefferson, okay. So Jefferson's attitude was you have this nature's God, but they had the remainder still of basically Christian teaching. Basically, it's just, a lot of them were Dutch. A lot of them were Dutch Christians who were in, New Amsterdam. There's one of the main founders, I think, the guy they wrote that play about, he married one of these Dutch dowresses, and then became part of this sort of claque of Dutch who dominated New York, and then up until the time of the Civil War or so, when the new money came in, and then they built their new gaudy opera house because they had been excluded from the old Dutch aristocracy, the Knickerbockers and so on. That age of innocence thing. You get this situation in America where for a long time there's even though the principles, for a long time there's a lingering of strong habits. So what I mean by strong habits is the same thing as like that. Rand Paul says, yes, he recognizes that we're treaty to the United Nations. He recognizes that we have treaty obligations to the United. He says we should withdraw from it. That's his recommendation. But then at the same time, he acts like we don't really have to take seriously that the ICC came out with this, and that have treaty obligations to the United Nations, which we're a founding and constituting member of. But why? Because that's not his. That's not where he lives. That's not where he exists, right? This is like, but the Hermes type has to observe all these different angles and the whole sort of Article 1, Article 2, Article 3 operations, deliberations about the future, yes saying and no saying to the immediacy, and Article 3, the judiciary branch doing the so-called forensic, or as it were in a certain sense, the merely propositional interpretation of philosophy. Which doesn't mean there ever was or such a thing, but it's only that people found out they could describe, in a way, it's only that people found out they could consistently describe everything from that point of view of propositional thinking, or from the point of view of describing sort of the practical way people are operating with stuff, as with tools or so, or as me talking to this cell phone and knowing how it works and so on, and being able to adjust it and use it in certain ways, but just just as the animal can do a lot of things that they're used to in their environment, as it were. One could describe things in these different ways, but sometimes when some take power, then you get a situation where you take certain things seriously and other things not seriously. So for instance, there's a case in Spring Snow in Mishima where these two peer school boys are hosting two princes from across the sea in Thailand, and they've come over and they see in the offing some kind of statue of Buddha, and they immediately unhesitatingly fall into the smoldering mulch and have no regard for their clean linen and so on, and into a deep bow, and put the palms together in prayer. And then the two peer school, these are that went to the same school as Yoko Ono, the two peer school boys, they feel absolutely no desire to ridicule this. They're just looking on, but it's totally alien to them. That's not their attitude, and they don't feel like it could really become a factor in their life. It's not part of their Dasein, okay? Just in the same way, I'm saying, we have a certain attitude where the notion in the governing power is set up so that people like Rand Paul and people like Rubio are having this struggle between these three institutions, where the hermeneutic view, which recognizes these other factors, is it's not part of that institution, except as the Judith Butler factor, right? Except as the creator of the phantasms in the so-called ivory tower.